Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and someone linked me an article in The Guardian a couple of days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, which was actually really interesting. It was really about the reasons why people had changed their minds on whether Brexit should happen or not. In particular, what I found really interesting were people who voted to leave and their reasons for that, and then reasons for changing their mind and saying they'd want to remain now. Because it is quite difficult to find the reasons why 17 million people would have voted to leave the EU. Apart from anything else, there are very noisy people who will try and claim that every single one of them voted for the same reasons, even though those reasons are the exact opposite of the reasons that those same gobshites were giving to try and persuade people to vote when the referendum was upcoming, as opposed to having been done. But there you go. So the article is quite illuminating. So, as I say, not only the original reasons for leaving, which was interesting enough, but also the reasons for changing their mind. And then there's a few ones of interest the other way as well, although not quite the same. But we'll see that. We'll get to that anyway. So the first guy that was talking about this was someone who, first of all, believes that the EU is an unnecessary organisation. We don't need this. Now, I would sort of debate that one in terms of, well, okay, but if we leave, we don't stop the organisation being a thing, you know. But anyway, the other thing, the really interesting one I've sort of thought of myself is it's dissuaded us training our own people. Basically, we rely on people from other countries to bring certain skills into the country, skills that we frankly do not have. And we don't have them because we don't really push people to get them. I know as a teacher, I've seen this for 20 years, where we are trying to push our young people into studies that the country doesn't need. You know, I mean, this was, not just the Conservative Party, Labour government as well has done the same thing. You know, we have this crusade for trying to get as many people as possible to study for degrees. But then most of those people then end up, of course, studying degrees that are too basic, or, they just end up getting jobs that don't need degrees at all because they don't actually have useful skills. Or if they do have useful skills as a result of those degrees, there are too few jobs that require those skills. And it's all about international league tables, as mad as that sounds, in terms of how many graduates. Oh, you've got a very educated population because you've got this number of graduates. Yeah, but if they're working in McDonald's, who cares? Whereas what we don't have are the skills that you don't get by going to university. You get by getting an apprenticeship at an engineering firm, for example, or somewhere like that. So that reasoning, I also liken it to football in this country. So we have the Premier League, which is a very lucrative football league in England and Wales, really. And as a result of it, a lot of people have blamed it on the decline in, for example, English football. Although I always argue the fact that we have separate English, Welsh, Scottish and Northern Irish football teams has to feed into that. We've had some great players of those nations. If we just had a British team, then we'd do much better. But nonetheless, it's been pointed at a bit of a decline because if you look at all these great teams, they're spending money on the best players around the world to try and join these Premier League clubs. And then it makes it more difficult for homegrown talent to shine. And so it affects our international team. Now, whether or not that's true, it's certainly an accusation that's levelled at it. And you get this same idea. If you can just, as a government, think, well, hang on, first of all, you've got to persuade people. It's not that, careers like plumbing and becoming an electrician or any of the engineering in general, actually, we're just massively short on engineering, including the sort of engineering that you do benefit by going to university, like chemical engineering, for example, or even higher level mechanical electronic engineering. We don't have enough people going off and do that because we're not persuading people to go into the careers that we really need them to do. So, this is absolutely one of the reasons I can go with this. And this is not a reason where you have to believe in lies or need a lobotomy to actually come up with it. I can go with that. I can accept that. But what I don't accept is that leaving the EU would improve the situation. But I'm going to come on to that because this immigration issue comes in a bit later in the video. Now, what changed their mind was, for a start, it sort of slowly dawned upon them how it would affect others, including their family. This is someone who has family living in continental Europe, and there was a bit of a worry that people in Europe would lose respect for us given the lack of respect we've shown them. So that was one of their reasons, but just sort of generally considering the effects of others, in particular members of their own family. Now, another one voted leave because of the belief that the NHS would somehow gain. They believed the bus advert. Oddly, though, this person, he says that what changed his mind is he changed his mind when he realised that the NHS wouldn't get the money and that those in power had lied to him. Now, that sort of betrays a lack of understanding that people have, and indeed had at the time, of course, about the nature of politicians and of government. For example, those in power didn't lie to him. Nobody in power promised that the NHS would benefit from leaving the EU. Theresa May didn't, promote that bus advert. Philip Hammond didn't. The closest person to government, most of the people who did were not in government, not even in Parliament. But the closest person would have been Boris Johnson. But even Boris Johnson wasn't in power from this point of view. He wasn't the Chancellor and he wasn't the Prime Minister. So he had no say over where any alleged dividend would actually go. And then, the idea that, he also says, this guy, he says that his family were trying to tell him that the EU actually helps NHS funding. Because I'm rather surprised that he would believe that a Conservative government, if it did get a windfall, let's say you believe that there's at least a windfall, that they would spend it on the NHS. When have the Conservative government ever done that? Even Conservative supporters, hard Conservative supporters, are not realistically going to believe that if there was a load of money came into the country, that it would go on the NHS. So, I think that's got to be just born of someone not paying attention to politics, really. Another one. Now, this one, again, was one that was alluded to, but I've never come across anyone who's actually said this is the reason for them voting, even though it did seem to come through from polls after the referendum in terms of why people voted. And basically, for this lady, it was a protest vote against the Smarmy twins, David Cameron and George Osborne. And there was a strong element of, people just... They wanted really to punch those two in the face, but you're not allowed to punch the Prime Minister or the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the face, or indeed anyone. Don't do that. So what better way? Well, they're standing up, trying to tell me to vote to stay in the EU. Well, I'll show you. I'm going to vote leave. There, how do you like that? Well, David Cameron didn't seem to mind. He went off to France. George Osborne, again, is just quietly slunk away. So what is it that led to the change of mind? So first of all, an acknowledgement that they were led by, not really knowing very much about what the realities were going to be, and there's now better understood. But also, this person felt bad because when the results came out and it, became clear what sort of demographics had voted which way, they sort of noticed that, hang on a minute, the vast majority of young people voted to stay, and it's the older generation that voted to leave largely. And a bit of an understanding that in another generation's time, the people who effectively voted for this won't be around. But the ones who voted against it will be stuck with the consequences. So it's a sort of social conscience aspect of it that would sort of cause them to vote differently were there another referendum. So those are some interesting ideas. And as I say, I can totally get behind, if I talked about it myself, in terms of a potential benefit if we did leave the EU, in terms of having to face up to the shortfall in training, and that maybe would be a silver lining, but that's all it would be. But again, that's not something that's a direct consequence of being in the EU. That's just our government, because again, where are these skills come from? Largely the EU. So, the EU train their citizens, or many countries train their citizens in these skills. It's just us that got lazy. And that's down to our government, not the EU. But anyway, so some interesting things about those who voted to remain. All these guys voted to remain, but now they think we should leave. Now, I will point out here, not all of them say they would vote to leave if there were another referendum, just that they think we should. So, One lady, for example, did that not because she thinks we'll be better off. She knows we won't be better off. But she just sees the damage that's been done to the country. She wants politicians basically to back May's deal and just get it done, and then go through rough times in order to get through it. She acknowledges it's going to be a good old rough time ahead, but to hell with it. Let's just make a clean break of it. It's not the same, as I say, as saying that she would vote leave in another referendum. More that the current situation, we don't have another referendum. There's no, at the moment, it doesn't look realistic that we're going to get one, even though people are still very much pushing for it. Ironically, there is another protest being organised, but for late March, literally the last possible moment, again to insist on another referendum. I've no doubt it will be another huge protest, just like the other ones have been, but that will be very last minute. So what she thinks, she thinks, look, the country has been damaged by this. Just, people are, we're already suffering from it. Just get whatever deal we've got. We've got a deal. That's it. It's not going to be changed. Just get it done. Get it out of the way and let's get moving on. That's her one. Now, there was another one who again voted Remain. All right, because this is a business owner, they know the negative effect on businesses. They've since changed their mind. They've changed their mind for a couple of reasons. First of all, they think their business will be okay out of it. I'm not quite sure how, given that they employ quite a lot of EU workers, but they think they will. But it was the actual immigration aspect that did for them. Not out of any sort of racism on this one. They just looked at it. They thought there'd be some benefits to a reduction in migration in the belief that it allows communities to bind together. So they're observing over time, communities becoming more isolated, and they put this down to immigration. But for me, I think their ideas are vain for two reasons. First of all, the rate of immigration will not go down. We just get it from somewhere else. In fact, the government, already knowing that we've already got less EU migration, because a lot of people from the EU are not wanting to move over to Britain because it's just so much in the air. Why would you move somewhere when your right to stay might be taken away from you at any moment? And there's already some people that have left. So the government knows this, and it knows it's got a shortfall in employment. This idea that we have an excess of people coming to the country is an absolute nonsense. We don't have enough. But they've got plans. They've already put plans in place to try and attract people to come into the country from outside of the EU. So all you do is you just replace EU immigrants with immigrants from elsewhere to make up the shortfall. So another Windrush is on the horizon if we don't come to a deal with the EU. And, are those people on an anti-immigration ticket going to behave themselves any better with Asian immigrants than they are with European ones? The second reason is about the communities aspect of it. So it's certainly true. I observe this. Communities are becoming more isolated. Sort of, you get less of a sense of a community. I speak to my neighbours every now and then, but it's just like, for stuff, if something gets delivered next door or something, I go, oh, have you got my package, and vice versa, and little things like that. Don't socialise with them or anything, and nor have I anywhere that I've lived. But the reason for that isn't because all of a sudden we've got immigration now and we didn't have it before the EU. We've had immigration for 2,000 years. Britain's been built on it. In fact, there is not a Britain alive that doesn't remember massive amounts of immigration. So that's really just misty-eyed looking back at days gone by when maybe there was a greater sense. Well, there was a greater sense of community within communities, and neglecting the fact that was still while lots of migration was happening. So, the migration patterns haven't really changed in this person's lifetime. So, that's not going to help either. At the end of the day, communities are becoming more isolated, for a number of reasons. We could go into all sorts of reasons, but modern living ultimately, Now, finally, there was another lady, again, who believes we should leave, not because we'd be better from it, but because of her fear of populism taking hold in British politics if we don't. And this is another one for which there is definitely merit in it. And it's one of the reasons why I say there is no good outcome. For the longest time now, there is no good outcome. Nothing will make me happy, for example. Just some things are better than others. So, because you might be, imagine that I'd be delighted. Let's say another referendum were issued. I should be delighted, over the moon. No, for me, it's the least bad outcome of all the possible ones. But it would mean that the full reality of what these Brexiteer charlatans push will be, will always just be something we're saying would happen. It'll never actually happen, right? In that environment, they could actually stir up the people against established politics and even each other in unbridled fury. You see the comments, oh, it's undemocratic to have another referendum. And if we have another referendum, oh, what about the first vote? Even if that comes out strongly leave, even more strongly than the first vote, they'll still say, but you had a referendum, they should have respected that. And the thing is this, people are not that stupid. They know that they're getting a raw deal in life. They know that. But the blame doesn't lie with the EU, it lies with our own government. Many of the ways in which our hand in life would actually become better is if the UK adopted more of the EU laws that apparently we're forced to adopt, even though we don't, but our government resists it. For example, those on tax avoidance. We know that one's just come online this year, but there's been other ones as well that our government's resisted. London is effectively a giant money laundering scheme. Everyone sort of associates financial irregularities with, say, Switzerland. But actually, if you consider all British financial centres as one, including British overseas territories, Britain is the king of dirty money. It really is the most corrupt financial country in the world. And we do this because we resist EU rules on preventing it. And if we did, more taxes would be paid. Yes, some people wouldn't then trade their money in the UK as much. But where else are they going to go if everywhere else is behaving itself? But, what good does it do us if they're trading that money in the country, if it's not been spent in the country and none of that money is going into the Treasury coffers? It does us no good at all. All it does is raise up the cost of living in London. No. You'd have more people having to pay more taxes. That means more public money. Simple as that. So we would benefit from that. But that's not what they see. They are, the EU is being blamed for this and people are buying it. Because after all, they don't want to blame their own government, except they do blame their own government. It's a bit mad. It's a little bit mad. But anyway, nonetheless, these people have been convinced that it's the EU that's the problem and that if they left, it'll all be marvellous. And, that they've been convinced that the EU are the source of their strife. So remaining has the very real potential for serious trouble if we still have a parliament playing party politics as well. Because parliament could absolutely get on top of this and start to actually show people the benefits of being the EU, to adopt those rules and actually give people a fairer deal, and actually the problem would go away. But that's not, we all know that's not going to happen. So, it's been said before, there is merit in allowing a no deal in order to see all of the poisons of these people come out and get at least a majority to face up to the reality of what they voted for. Can't blame the EU for not in the EU anymore. They would then have to answer to those of us who tried to tell them, as opposed to the other way around. So this is a reason I understand. This one is absolutely a reason I understand. There is something to be afraid of in populist politics in the event of somehow remaining. Even, quite frankly, of leaving with a deal, a so-called soft Brexit. There's fear in populism even there. I just don't judge it, that the no deal, even though all these poisons would come out, I don't judge it as the best case scenario. Just a terrible destination that at least has a working toilet. That's how I judge a no deal Brexit. And one you'd be wanting to leave as soon as possible. But, it wouldn't be soon, would it? So anyway, those are, I found that quite interesting. Those are some reasons that people gave for both voting Remain and then changing their mind, as well as those who voted Leave and then changed their mind, as well as those who voted Leave, Remain. Get it right. You know what I'm talking about. I'm going to stop now. My brain's gone. But anyway, hope you found the video interesting. Anyway, I've put a link in the article below if anyone actually wants to read it for themselves. And if you've enjoyed it, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. Click the bell notification as well. There'll be another poll going out at some point too. And until next time, I'll see you later.